Hello and welcome to another edition of Business 7. Now, the latest national account figures released by the Namibia Statistics Agency recently paint an even grimmer picture of the economy. It is in a much worse state than was thought earlier this year when the NSA produced their preliminary figures. In the studio tonight, we have Robert McGregor. He is the Chief of Research at Cirrus Capital, and he's going to reflect on the NSA's latest figures, especially in terms of what it says about the state of the consumer in Namibia. We also have Theo Klein. He's the economist at Simonis Storm, and he's going to look at the very concerning plummeting trend of investment in Namibia. Stay tuned. As mentioned earlier, we are joined by the head of research of Cirrus Capital, Robert McGregor. Robert, welcome back and nice to have you here again.
Good morning and thanks for having me once again.
Robert, the national account figures that has just been released, the final ones by the NSA, certainly do not paint an encouraging picture, especially when it comes to the state of the consumer. What is your take on this?
Yes, so with the annual national accounts, we've seen that sort of private consumption, which is essentially household consumption, if we look at GDP from the demand side, has been declining significantly for several years now, especially last year, quite a large contraction of around 10% in real terms. This is obviously quite concerning. If we look at GDP from the demand side, for anyone who's done economics 101, it's very simple. It's the consumption, which is what we're talking about here, household consumption, as well as government spending, net exports and investment. In the Namibian economy, household consumption typically makes up around 70 to 75% of overall GDP. And so obviously with that declining significantly, it's from the demand side, one of the large drivers of the large contraction we had last year.
Robert, very technical terms for the layman. Breaking it down, we also see that disposable income has been declining. What does that mean to the man in the street?
Yeah, so that's very much reflected in the household consumption side. Obviously, people having less incomes over the past year, people's incomes being affected either by losing their jobs and retrenchments, businesses closing down, as well as reduced working hours or reduced wages as businesses were affected by the pandemic and the lockdowns as well. And so what we see is obviously that feeds through into reduced consumption. Reduced consumption also results in reduced production and to a large extent reduced imports. On the import side, that is sort of net positive for the economy because imports are a drag on growth. But I mean, from what we can, and what's worrying is we've seen this across a lot of lines, both in nominal and in real terms last year. So whether adjusted for inflation or not, we saw reduction in consumption very much in significant lines. I mean, we've seen it for things like food and beverages as well, where in current prices, so in everyday prices, that's back below or to sort of 2017 levels, and that's at an aggregated level. So that's for the economy as a whole. If you consider then that the population has grown over this period as well, so say since 2017, by around 135,000 people at least, based on the national accounts numbers. What we then see is that on a per person basis, Namibians are spending or consuming significantly less, and that's very worrying.
Robert, it seems like a conundrum. On the one hand, we need consumers to spend because it's such a big part of the economy. On the other hand, we simply do not have the money to do so. So how are we going to fix this mess?
Well, I mean, what we need is obviously to see an improvement in employment as well as household wages. Government is by far the single largest employer in this economy, and obviously we know from the budget documents that government isn't planning on passing any wage adjustments this year or for the next 2 years. So what we really need to see is an improvement on sort of from the private sector side in terms of employment and wage growth feeding through into better revenues for government as well, which can then also potentially result in at least some wage normalization there. But obviously, once we've got sort of reduced budget deficits and so on, but obviously this is not something that can turn around so easily, especially in these times. So where the economy has been contracting for several years, still remains frankly quite poor. Sort of very low growth based off of where we've come from. And for us, very much the spark here lies in investment in gross fixed capital formation. So that's investment into fixed assets. We talk about things like lands, building, machinery, equipment, similar. And this is important because that obviously allows for improved productivity. Improved productivity means increased output. You can then sort of justify more employment and higher wages. What we've seen over the last couple of years, and significantly since about 2014, is that both in nominal and in real terms, again, gross fixed capital formation has been declining. So that points to reduced overall investment in the Namibian economy. And this is worrying because it's a leading indicator. So obviously, if you've got reduced investment, you're not going to see increases in employment or wage growth over the longer term. And so that's where we really need to see the turnaround. We need to see that change in investment, that change in gross fixed capital formation, to see these improvements feed through into higher wages, higher employment, and obviously that can then allow for higher consumption from households.
To a certain extent, we're just talking new numbers. None of this, in terms of trends, is new news or is news. And yet government doesn't seem to respond. What does government have to do to be able to fix Namibia as an investment destination?
So these are points that I think have been aired a lot in the media. Obviously, these trends are nothing new, something that's been spoken about for many years. A lot of the investment in the past has been private sector driven, and especially those peaks we had in around 2013, 2014 were driven by investment into the mining sector. I mean, we had 3 significant mines being built at the time. The Husab mine, as well as B2Gold's or Chikoto mine, and to some extent the Chudi copper mine as well. But what we've seen since then is obviously decline in overall investment, and since about mid-2018, we've also seen net FDI outflows, whereas Namibia has before that typically reported net inflows. And we think very much an indication of the investment environment that's been created. Obviously, the changes we need there, not just policy certainty, as many people talk about. Yes, we do need certainty about these policies that have been hanging in the air for many, many years, but we need certainty on what it's going to say as well. So it's not just on the uncertainty, but what that document is going to be. Is it going to be what investors want or what they're concerned about? Yes or no. Obviously, once you've got that certainty, if it's policy that is not conducive to investment, your policy uncertainty doesn't matter. So we need very clear indications of what direction this is going. We need that, frankly, to be finalized, but we need those concerns from the private sector, from investors, whether domestic or foreign, to be heeded very much. And as well, and then there's lots of sort of low-hanging fruit, making it easier to start and run your businesses, moving processes online, simplifying the steps, rather than needing to go through several different entities, improving VAT repayments, these sorts of things that we've spoken about many a time. At this point in time, there is work being done by various agencies, including those set up by government, but at the same time, this isn't frankly moving quickly enough. We need to see a lot more urgency in the space for things to turn around meaningfully in the near term.
Robert, thank you very much for your insights. As always, we hope government is watching this program. Thank you very much, and have a good weekend.
Thanks for your time. Cheers.
joined by Theo Klein. He is the economist at Simonis Storm Security and no stranger to this program. Good morning, Theo. Thank you very much for being in our virtual studio again.
Good morning, Jo Marie. Thanks for having me.
The national accounts that were released by the Namibia Statistics Agency recently paints a very bleak picture when it comes to the investment and the trends around investment in Namibia. Can you just summarize what the figures say?
Certainly. So we continue to see a declining trend in gross fixed capital formation, which is pretty much just investments that's taking place in the economy in a given year. From all the sectors in our economy, we only had positive investment taking place in the mining and quarrying sector. All other sectors had negative growth rates in the amount of Namibian dollars being invested in those sectors. So this is definitely worrying, but it also just shows us once again that business confidence remains low. Why would I invest or take out a loan to invest in my business if I am fairly negative or pessimistic about future economic prospects? So if I am rather pessimistic, I'm of course not going to, make an investment into my business. I'm rather actually going to try and cut down. So I think this is just indicative once again of the mindsets that our businesses are in. And these numbers should not be it's not too surprising to have seen this. I think another thing that we continue to see is that the public sector, which government, is investing a lot less than the private sector. And it's not just from last year where government had unexpected expenses due to the COVID pandemic. It's been going on since 2015 where government invests more or less a third of what the private sector invests. So the whole narrative of, the private sector must do more and must step up to the plate, come to the party, that's sort of not really entirely accurate or appropriate to say that, because we've seen that private sector actually invests a lot more than government. So I think, the private sector, in order to increase the investment is needed, because that's the only way you expand production. That's how you make our workers more productive, and for them to produce more and possibly earn higher salaries and so forth. So investment is a necessary for any economy. Also, just not to, it's actually more a long-term thing as well. So we need to invest today for our future generations to have certain assets or capital goods to actually produce goods and services. So it's really investing for the future as well. So it definitely is a necessary. And I think what I almost dare want to say government sometimes does not realize is that for the private sector to invest, certain things needs to be done. In other words, the private sector needs an environment where you have stable policy, you have good governance from government, you have efficient rule of law, that contracts and the courts and the legal system need to work efficiently. The private sector needs to be able to do business very easily. I need to be able to register a company and get working permits and register for tax very easily and efficiently, and so forth. So I think, and that is actually the government's responsibility. Government needs to make sure that the environment in which the private businesses operate is working efficiently. We need proper regulation, but also not regulation that inhibits growth or daily business operations. And this all comes from government. So I think, and the funny thing is, government does not need to spend a lot of money to create a better environment for businesses. It's quite simply just a thing of saying, Home Affairs, you need to work better, you need to be more productive. Your workers need to put in the hours and do the job that's required of them. And the same thing for all other government departments that do public administration. Ministry of Finance, we cannot have lost businesses' tax returns, and now we want to fine them and give penalties to them. And now they need to come in for audits and to try and bring down the penalties, and they still need to fight to show that we've actually paid our taxes. That's just not on. And I think it doesn't cost you money to quite simply just tell people, do your job better, improve management, become more efficient, and work harder and be more productive. It does not cost you money to do that. So I think there's a lot that government can do at very fairly low costs, but it will have a big impact and it will lead to so much big improvements in the environment which private sector operates in. And then obviously we might see increased investment taking place, because investments is actually a psychological thing. As I said earlier, I will only invest if I feel fairly positive or optimistic about the future. And that is difficult to change. I think another thing is that, everyone is saying, yeah, interest rates are low, it's cheap to take out a loan and so forth, but we're not really seeing that, especially with the private sector credit extension numbers. We are seeing only increases in demand for overdrafts as opposed to long-term loans. And that once again speaks to, businesses are really more focused on just keeping head above water at the moment. They can't, and they're not really necessarily planning for the future because they're not doing long-term investments. So if we look at the different sectors, the sector that had the biggest divestment, biggest percentage negative change in investment was electricity and water. Investment decreased from about 1.1 billion to only 370 million. So that's a 68% drop. I think why that should not be too concerning is that, I've had discussions with Manpower and they expect electricity demand to be low. So, with lockdown, certain businesses are, closed permanently. I mean, even recently we've had gyms and nightclubs and bars being closed completely. So then obviously you see a dip in electricity demand. Also with the curfew, your business hours of nightclubs and other businesses are also reduced. So demand for electricity, is expected to be low. So that's why Nampower, also decides not to produce as much electricity. So that one, that's not too concerning. I think other sectors such as fishing, a decrease of 66% in investments for 2020. Wholesale and retail, hotels and restaurants together, investment decreased by about 51%. And construction down 32%. So these are naturally also sectors that have been hit very hard by the lockdown and the related restrictions that are still, that we still see now coming to play now and again. So, it's expected for these sectors to not necessarily invest much. In actual fact, we've seen a lot of retailers closing shop because they just cannot keep their businesses afloat. The similar with hotels and certain restaurants as well. So the numbers are definitely worrying, but like I said, I think government can go a very long way to improve these numbers by just simply increasing, improving the efficiency of public administration. Exactly. Another thing I wanted to talk about was, the policy environment. We cannot have uncertainties such as NEF and policies that are, that are not business friendly. Policies that will, not necessarily encourage foreigners to set up shop in Namibia. So we cannot have policies such as NEF if we want higher investment from the private sector or from foreigners in our country.
Yes.
We do know also of stories where, foreign companies wanted to come and open factories and plants in Namibia. But, government's very welcoming. But when it comes to regional council, if something isn't handed below the table, then they can't proceed to open shop. And I just think that, that is also something that, doesn't cost a lot of money to fix. It certainly requires a lot of courage to speak up about it and to try and change it. But it doesn't cost a lot of money.
Yes.
So I think the story is fairly simple, Jeremy, in the sense that, if government can just get those basics right, we can see that will build confidence, and that will build optimism, so that we can then see increased investment taking place in our economy. The last thing that I can maybe touch on is, what type of investment, the little that did take place, in what form was it? In 2020, we've seen the biggest amount of investment taking place in the machinery and other equipment category. So, machinery is just basic machines, computers, and even an ice cream machine, whatever that businesses buy to, produce goods and to sell to consumers. Equipment, I think to a large extent that was primarily the earth moving equipment, and the so-called yellow vehicles that the mines purchased in order to expand their operations. We do know that a lot of mines did care and maintenance last year, but also they invested heavily to expand the operations and increase the life of their mines. So I think that primarily came from the mining sector, although it was still a drop from 2019 to 2020, but that was about 6.5 billion that was invested in that category. The second biggest category was buildings. And this also remains puzzling due to construction actually being down by 9% in 2020. But investments in buildings can also be, just renovations, maintenance, and so forth. So that was the second biggest form of investment that we've seen in our economy.
Theo, in a nutshell, what is your expectations for economic growth in the short term?
Okay. Germany, we remain fairly optimistic, and we've been criticized for that by quite a few people, but we still forecast annual GDP growth for 2021 at 2.2%, a positive 2.2%.
Very positive,
and
concerning the bond says that it's going to be 1.4%. Well, somebody's got to be positive. Thank you.
Yeah. Look, I think the primary reason, there are maybe two primary reasons for our forecast, and that is that we do believe the economy we find it very difficult to believe that the economy should do significantly worse compared to last year, given that we don't have a hard national lockdown. In 2021, the life was fairly normal throughout 2021, except for the third wave, in June and July and a bit of August, where we had social restrictions in place, and we still have the curfew, for example. But to a great extent, life has been fairly normal in 2021. So we just find it difficult to believe that the economy should do significantly worse compared to last year. The second reason is, I guess you've heard this a lot from others as well, that we do expect the economy to come off from a very low base.
Yes, exactly.
So if we still show negative or a contraction in 2021's GDP numbers, I think that will be a very big knock to everyone, to a lot of people's confidence, and to the little bit of optimism that some might have had for the future. Although, if we continue to look at the monthly data that's coming out, it does seem ever more likely. So we, at the moment, maintain our 2.2% forecast. The second quarter GDP numbers will be released by the NSA on the 23rd of September. So by then, we will just analyze the numbers again and possibly make revisions or adjustments to our forecast. I know from local economists to credit rating agencies and across government departments such as Ministry of Finance and Bank of Namibia, the forecast range in between 1.4% and 3%. So everyone else is also positive, I guess, just to certain degrees. Some are more positive than others. But like I said, we maintain it at 2.2% for now.
Well, I certainly hope you're right. We can do with 2.2%, even if it comes off minus 8.5%, it will be most welcome. Theo, thank you very, very much for your insights. And we wish you a blessed weekend.
Thanks, you too, Jamari. And I wish, if you have taken leave for this Friday, I do hope you have a wonderful long weekend.
Thank you, Theo. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
If you're feeling how I'm feeling and you know I won't stop, all we gotta do is take our love to the top. If I got it and you want it and you'll never let it drop, all we gotta do is take our love to the top. I will ride for you, maybe even die for you. When I'm loving you, but my heart don't stop.
That was Business 7 for this week. Thank you very much for joining. Now, if you have a long weekend ahead of you and you're traveling out of town, remember to drive carefully. Enjoy, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.